One of the biggest things that people are concerned about with aging is loss of muscle tissue, and they should be worried about it. There are a bunch of studies that show that as people get older, they are naturally going to lose muscle. I have to say, I feel like some of these studies are going to be proven incorrect in the next few years, because you have to remember that what our parents went through as they were passing through their 40s and 50s was they were actually encouraged to do no activity or to limit their activity, with this belief that a 40-year-old couldn't possibly do anything physical and stay alive. Like, they were going to have a heart attack and it was all going to be catastrophic for them. In my age group, you're definitely going to see 40 and 50-year-olds staying much more active as they get into their 60s and 70s, and medical people now are encouraging people to stay more active. So activity in general plays a very big part of maintenance of muscle tissue as we get older, and as people age and they're encouraged to keep strength training in particular, they're going to maintain muscle mass better than what you saw in previous studies. So some of this information is going to change over the next 20 to 30 years as my generation ages through this process, and they realize that a lot of what they've seen with our parents is actually flawed based on how they were encouraged to sit and do nothing, basically. But what you see with age is this loss of muscle tissue. Now, we need to distinguish between the kinds of muscle tissue because they're not all the same. So broadly, we have fast and slow twitch muscle fiber. Slow twitch is pretty simple. It's for slow or endurance kind of activities. So walking long distances, running a marathon, these are all slow twitch activities. Fast twitch, running 100 meters, jumping, throwing something as far as you can. These are all very fast twitch activities. And it's the fast twitch muscle fibers that actually show the greatest loss as we age. And actually in men, it's worse than in women. So what the studies are currently showing is that men suffer from this more than women do. There's a question now whether this is actually due to a drop in testosterone and androgen levels as we age, because clearly women aren't going to have the same problem that men are with dropping androgen levels as they age, or if this is something else. So something to keep in mind is that maybe if you're trying to offset this as much as possible as a man, maybe TRT is a route you want to look at, because then you're going to prevent that androgen loss. You're going to help stave off that loss of muscle tissue. Now, when we're looking at power, so we need things that are very fast. We need things that we really can't do many of. Everyone makes this mistake with power training, thinking that it should be as heavy as possible. And the reality is that actually it needs to probably be a little bit lighter than you think. So there's this thing called the force velocity curve. And what it says is that at one end, we have very low speed, but very high load activities, like a heavy deadlift or squat, right? Like, I'm not moving very fast when I'm lifting the maximum possible weight, but I'm exerting high force. At the other end of the curve, I have very low load and very high speed. Jumping and sprinting are great examples of these things, where I have no external load at all, but I'm able to travel as fast as possible and my limbs are able to express that explosivity as much as possible. When it comes to looking for exercises to work on power as we get older, we want to keep things as simple as possible. Now, the two classics always for power training is jumping and throwing. Now, throwing is really simple. We usually use a medicine ball, not something like a tennis ball. You'd use a weighted ball. The weight of the ball doesn't need to be any heavier than 5% of your body weight, is what the studies show. So for an 80 kilo guy, that's a 4 kilo ball. For a 100 kilo guy, it's a 5 kilo ball. For a 60 kilo person, it's a 3 kilo ball, and so on. And you see in a lot of gyms, the medicine balls are too heavy straight away. You could probably go to your gym and find the lightest medicine ball possible if you wanted to do some throwing. But throwing comes with some negatives for most people. I don't know about you, but I train at home. If I started throwing a medicine ball into a wall as hard as possible, I'd probably shake the roof off my house. Maybe I'll put a hole in the wall. I can guarantee, because I've actually done this, if you do it at a gym, you are going to get told off almost instantly when you start going and slamming a ball into a wall as hard as possible. So an alternative, I could go outside, I could go to a field, and I could throw the ball as far as possible. Maybe I chest pass it as far as possible in front of me. I throw it as far as possible overhead, but that means I've had to leave my location to go to a specific location to do some throwing activity. So throwing, while it's a very useful drill, often comes with some, we're going to say, timetable issues. So a little bit of scheduling problems. So jumping is a much more convenient way for people to get this power training in. Now, when we start jumping, we need to build into it. So an older body, and athletically, if you're over 35-year-old, so an older body trying to do athletic movement, maybe you haven't done anything fast for 20 years at this point. So don't go jumping about like you're a 15-year-old and suddenly wondering why you popped your Achilles tendon. You're gonna need to put some training in to get there. So we start with double leg jumps. You can jump either forwards or vertically. There's not a huge difference between either. One has slightly more quadricep use, one has slightly more glute and hip use, but largely it's the same thing. I'm concentrating on jumping as explosively as possible and sticking the landing. The reason I want to stick the landing is because that landing force really helps to strengthen muscles very, very quickly, okay? So while you think the jumping is where the problem is, injuries all come from landings and deceleration. Very few people get hurt actually jumping. They get hurt when they land and they get hurt when they're decelerating, say from a maximal sprint. So learning some deceleration skill and how to land squarely on both feet is a very important step before progressing to the next step, which would be repeat jumps. During repeat jumping, my goal is not just to jump as high as possible, but to be on the ground for the least possible period of time. And so when you look at a squat jump, I don't have to squat very deep to make my jump as high as possible. Maybe it's a third is as deep as I need to go, because my focus is on being as high as possible and on ground for as little as possible. And if I were doing these for broad jumps, I would be, again, bouncing off the floor as fast as possible, minimizing my contact time between each rep. In terms of how many reps, my goal is always high quality. It's not that I want to go for sets of 10 or sets of 20, it's that I want to go as high as possible. And what you'll probably find, the first 1 or 2 reps, you feel yourself jumping higher, and maybe 3, 4, 5 are about the same. And then suddenly on the 6th and 7th rep, you notice you're actually not jumping quite so high. Maybe you're on the ground for a little bit longer. Maybe your landings aren't so clean. Stop the set. You're not after a set number of reps. You're after teaching your body to be explosive as possible. And some days, that may be as little as 2 or 3 reps per set, just based on how your nervous system is, other stresses you've got in your life, how fatigued you are from previous training sessions. And there are other days where you might be able to do sets of 10 to 15 reps, all at very high quality. You need big rests between sets. So the nature of ATP replenishment, so that's the energy system that we use for power, is that at 1 minute, I've recovered about 50%. And then it works in a half-life thing. So at 2 minutes, I get half of 50%, so I get 25% extra back at the 2 minute mark. So now I have 75%. Now I get 12.5% on top of 75%. So you see now I'm at 87.5%. So I'm at about 90% at about the 3 minute mark. So for full recovery, you're really looking at something between 5 and 10 minutes. If you're an Olympic athlete, we definitely want full recovery to be working at maximum power. But for us, if you're resting about 3 minutes between sets, you're going to be recovered enough to work very hard in your next set. If we don't want to jump, we could do an upper body exercise like the push-up. Except instead of using a clap push-up, we're just going to use what I call a power push-up. The goal is to drive as hard as you can off the ground and get as much height as possible before coming back down. Now you can do these the same as jumps where you minimize the contact time, but you can also just do these where you reset between each one, make sure you produce maximum power on every single rep. You're probably going to find sets of 3 to 6 reps is about all you can do for maximum power output, and again, about a 3 minute rest between sets. Now, if we want to start using weighted implements, the kettlebell works really well for these. Kettlebell swings are a fantastic power exercise for someone who maybe has a lower limb injury. So that could be a calf tear, could be an Achilles strain, plantar fasciitis, maybe just their ankle is a bit sore and jumping is something that they shouldn't be doing right now. The kettlebell swing actually gives you the same muscular recruitment as a vertical jump, except for what goes on at the ankle. So this thing called plantar flexion, you miss out on that when you do kettlebell swings versus jumping. The Goldilocks weight for kettlebell swings, everyone thinks it has to be heavier, heavier, heavier. Research actually shows that on force plates, maximum force is at about 30% of body weight for a kettlebell. So that means that an 80 kilo guy is probably going to use a 24 to a 28 kilo kettlebell. When you start going heavier beyond that, actually force decreases because speed comes down. So force is a combination of the load and the speed that you move it at. Eventually the load gets too high, the speed comes down, you're actually producing less force. So don't worry about going heavy, again, worry about going fast. And when we do kettlebell swings, we could do standard 2-hand swings. or we could do what is usually called the power swing, which is basically a reset and treat every rep as an individual rep. Both can be very useful. You can see from a comparison to jumps point of view that the power swing looks a lot more like a single jump and a reset and a single jump and a reset. It's a little bit back to front though with swings versus jumping. A bunch of power swings tied together is much harder than repeat swings done together. You know, this power swing version is much more demanding in terms of how much power you need to produce. It's much more draining because you're in a static position for longer, and you're going to do less reps at high speed than you are if you do continuous swings. And then a final upper body option is the jerk. Now, the jerk is an excellent exercise for power. The researchers who found out about the Goldilocks weight at 30% for swings also happen to be training a bunch of elite athletes. So these guys are college strength and conditioning coaches. And what they found was that when people had progressed past the point where that 30% swing was useful, they moved to jerks. I can load the jerk up much heavier. And again, if you've got a really powerful athlete, not unusual that they might have a 100, 120 kilo jerk. Now when I want to go fast, man, I'm doing a 70 or 8 kilo jerk. That might be as high as body weight for many athletes. So it allows you to work much heavier, that engages more muscle, and that's really going to help to stave off that age-related loss of type 2B fibers. So there's a synopsis of power training for the aging athlete. It's really important that you introduce this into your training. So I run a framework for people I call the 4 Bs. The first B is bounce. It stands for power training. You should be dedicating 5 to 10 minutes out of every training session towards some power work. That could be as simple as 3 or 4 sets of jumps. It could be as simple as maybe 2 or 3 sets of jumps and a set of power push-ups. And even the #1 sprint coach in the world up till not long ago was a guy called Barry Ross. He trained greats like Allyson Felix. He's seriously one of the best track and field coaches the world has ever seen. Their total power training was a couple of sets of jumps and a couple of sets of power push-ups, and that was it for their speed work in the gym. The rest of their speed work they got out on the track. So if even the very best athletes in the world are dedicating time to this in sort of 4 or 5 sets at a time, we can certainly get a lot of benefit from it as we age, doing quite a minimal amount of work. You see, if I do a set and then 3 minutes of rest, I'm really only going to get about 4 sets into a 10 or 15 minute period. Now, if you like the content, make sure to hit like and subscribe as well. Go to my website at peakperformance40.com and join the Peak Performance community, where there are guys just like you looking for the best health and fitness advice so they can maintain peak performance for as long as possible.